we'll get started. So hi everyone, thanks so much for joining this meeting where we obviously have Michael here from Flow Immersive. He's going to be talking about from TikTok to AR, VR, data storytelling within new technology mediums. And I won't steal the thunder from you, Michael. We'll let you introduce yourself and kind of what you're going to be talking about. So the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. And feel free to interrupt at any point for any questions. I don't think this is meant to be too much of just a lecture, but rather somewhat interactive. So yeah, thanks again for having me. Just as a bit of background on myself, prior to Flow Immersive, I was a management consultant. So I'd like to say I'm a recovering management consultant that's making up for all the presentations I've given in my life, and really saw Flow as the next iteration of how we more effectively communicate with data. So at our core competency, we think that the way you change the world is not by adding more data to the repository, but rather more effectively communicating with the data that we have. And if we take climate change as sort of the prime example, adding more data for climate, probably not going to change things that drastically. However, if you're able to more effectively communicate to leaders, to influencers, using data, that's how we start to move things forward. And I would argue that the only way you can persuade someone is using data, that you need to find that common truth that you can agree on, and then form different opinions or different actions from that core piece of truth. So as I go through all of this, we've really focused in on data or data storytelling rather than data analysis. So there's a lot of visualization programs that I would argue are more geared towards data analysts or finding insights in data sort of on your own. But we focus more on how do you communicate using this data to a non-technical audience. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of just like our overall mission and some of the specifics there. Cool. All right. So let me start to dive in then. So I'm going to do something a little more experimental. We're starting to experiment now with basically being able to present a flow while in a Zoom meeting itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So ultimately, where we see the world is that this was a Gartner report back in January. And at that time, they took a survey and basically found that 60% of meetings were happening in person, 40% were virtual. And that's essentially, by 2024, they were expecting that virtual number to almost double, to 25% physical and 75% virtual. And I think we can all attest now that COVID has just accelerated this digital adoption. This was a trend we were already on. It's just that it pushed us further in that direction. But along the way, we're sort of experiencing three key pain points in Zoom meetings that cause things not to sort of forcing things into Zoom meetings that don't quite work there. And so ultimately, it's lack of engagement in the content itself. You're distracted, you're checking your email, you're doing something else. Two is interaction. If it's just one person presenting, like I am right now, just talking to you, it's very easy to sort of lean back and not be paying attention, or that it's hard for you to really participate in many regards. And then three is a lack of content understanding. And so that's really where we've focused in on in terms of the data elements of what I'm presenting. And so while there's other platforms, especially more in the spatial computing realm, that have focused on sort of presence and being able to physically be in the same room as someone, or not physically, but virtually be in the same room as someone using AR and VR, that's you're able to bridge that gap. And that we add this layer of understanding, that we really focus on the content. It's like what we're supposed to be talking about. And that's really where we're focused in. And so this is a fun little 2x2 where we can see our differentiation, but I'm not gonna opine too much on that element. But ultimately, our goal, and I'll show you guys this in a little bit, is we have our flow editor, which we have an active waitlist at present, but we are going to be letting people in. And so you guys have my email, and you can distribute that if there's students here that want to get early access, but just can commit to giving us feedback. I'm happy to grant some access, and we can go from there. Excuse me. But ultimately, let me go back one, sorry. Ultimately, our vision is that no matter what device you're on, so whether you're on a phone or you're on a laptop or a VR headset or an AR headset, that you're able to join these flow immersive spaces to have conversations around data. And those have hard benefits. So we've been able to quantify the benefits in terms of dollar savings from travel costs, but it's somewhat of a moot point at this point because no one's traveling. And so there's still quite a lot of value to be had. And so, I'll go through a lot more examples, but there's certain things that spatial computing really enhances. One of those being that you can fit more data, like physically fit more data into your view by having more space, like using that third dimension. And then ultimately what we've found is able to say seeing the forest and the trees. At those different levels of data aggregation, that there's different stories that emerge, right? Sort of the executive summary, the big picture of what's going on. And COVID sort of a great case example of that. And actually, what I'm showing here is very old. This is back in May, if you can believe it, when we were assessing sort of the situation. We saw hospitalizations decreasing and deaths sort of tailing off. But we can jump into a more recent one to dive further into that. And actually, let me do that real quick. Yeah, and so this idea that at different levels of data aggregation, you can tell different stories and sort of see that forest in the trees is one of those core competencies that we focus in on. And let me share this. So as an example of that, sort of seeing the new case trend in the US, that we can see, on a whole level that overall new cases are continuing to grow, and that we can then break that down further, right? That we can look into the South, the Midwest, the Northeast, and see the trends. And so this trend is just the total number of new cases averaged out over the last 7 days. And we can adjust that then per capita to see some more granularity. And what we see is that, that first peak that we saw in the Northeast, which was a scary time without a doubt, that the Midwest is at that level in terms of per capita. And that's actually continued to rise over the last week or so. I haven't updated this, but in a different R script, I've updated it. But that in that level of aggregation, we can then tease this apart further, right? That we can actually look into the individual states and understand their increases and how they're trending over time. And that then we can compare that to the Northeast. And there's all sorts of comparisons you can start to do, and when you have the room to do it. And so one thing I'm going to do here next, which I think is going to be a little more fun for everyone involved, is if you have an iPhone, what I'm going to ask is that for right now, if you can download an application called iOS for WebXR. It's pull it up real quick. So it's called WebXR Viewer. It's a AR project by Mozilla. So it's just a web browser by Mozilla that it's a workaround for iPhones at this point. If you have an Android phone, you're completely good to go there. But what we're going to do is actually dive into a flow together, so you guys can all join, and you can actually jump into AR mode, so you can actually walk around your room and see these models, and we'll be in the same environment together. So to facilitate that, once you've downloaded that app, if you can go ahead and scan this QR code you tap in the top address bar, there's a little QR code scanner in the top right-hand corner of the WebXR browser. Or if you're on an Android phone, you can just open up the camera on your phone. And then additionally, what I'll do is in the chat window here, I'm just going to paste the link to this. All right, I see people join in. Cool. So you can see how I see these like cell phones in my environment. And so those are people, right? And as they move around, I see them moving around. And if you hit the Enter AR button in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll be able to actually place this content in your room and walk around it that way. This one is quite big. I didn't quite optimize this for small spaces. So sorry for that. If you do enter AR mode and it's a little too big, I can go to a different one as well. But this was sort of a fun one that we more recently did. Actually, before I jump into that, are people able to get in? Should I wait a little longer? give me a sense for how people are feeling.
What happens if you open this link on web instead of like in the WebXR viewer?
You can do that as well. That's actually how I'm showing it right now. Okay. It's just on my computer. So it looks the same. Yeah, same level, same interactions of being able to move around the content, etc. Yep. And you should be able to see, you should see my avatar as well. So you should see my face as opposed to a cell phone. Is that working for you, Nicole?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so let me talk about this content a little bit. So this is the our recent election, and each dot is a county, except for the data I was using from Thomson Reuters was actually on every town was reporting, and so it's a little more confusing there. But anyways, I think we've seen this picture, right, where there's so much, the sea of red, in some regards, and when we start to dive through different perspectives of this data, there's different stories that emerge. So this first view is still looking at red versus blue, who ultimately won for that county. And what we can see is that we're adjusting it based on the number of votes cast, which is somewhat equivalent to the population, as you might imagine. And so we can see, LA County really dominating or being so much larger than the others. And that we can start to scroll through here. And so it gives a different impression, right? And so there's sort of that popular visualization that went around back in 2016, which was basically saying like land doesn't vote, people vote. And this is somewhat of the same type of visualization looking at that. But then we can start to change this perspective a little further, right? That's, it's not all just blue or red, but it's sort of a cross in between. And so this is actually breaking it down now on the percentage. So how Democratic or Republican is it? So the more red, the more more Republican, the more blue, the more Democratic. I should factor more into the third parties, but I did not in this visualization at least. And so this paints a little bit of a different picture. It's not super surprising, but I think tones down sort of the very stark contrast that we saw before. But that we can do other things too. So we can actually adjust the size of these dots, based on the population. This is sort of what you see more typically in a visualization. That you typically see a flat map with circles on it. I see someone moving around quite rapidly over there. And then in this last view, actually expanding that axis again, so it's still adjusting the number of votes on the height axis as well as the size of the dots. And so I personally think this map is really interesting to fly through and to start to sort of dig into. It's a little bit more exploratory and something I was doing more for fun just because it's election time and that is the time of year we should all be diving into data visualization, and is the time of year when looking at maps nonstop is okay. So yeah, a little bit about this visualization. And it's really cool to see all the people in here. Let's see, we have 19 people total right now. Yeah, that you're all able to interact and to be present in a virtual meeting. So I'll pause there. I would love to get your reaction to sort of joining this virtual meeting that I just hosted.
Yeah, this is like the most unique way I've ever seen information like this presented. It's like so engaging. It feels like I have control to just kind of like scroll around and see for myself and like investigate every little detail like when I want to. I don't know, just like I've never felt like this engaged looking at what essentially is just like a data just like in a meeting. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's yeah, thank you. And that point I think is really important, where essentially you want to impart on your audience somewhat of a level of curiosity and also credibility. And when you just present a slide, you don't have that much control for what you're seeing. You sort of are stuck there and you can't really do much else. And so having the ability to sort of explore on your own, I think is actually a pretty important way to keep an audience engaged. Additionally, one thing to note is that if someone finds an insight they can literally just point to it and say, hey, look at this, right? It's like you're literally pointing to something and other people can see you pointing and clicking on it. And so that also changes sort of the paradigm of interaction, where it's no longer just one person owning the whole conversation, but instead can be more of a conversation. And so that's somewhat of what we're enabling. But at that same time, you do want some level of control, which is why when I go like back a step, it changes everyone's visualization and your position. So it's like I'm taking along the ride with me on some of these steps, but that within each step that you can explore a bit on your own.
Yeah, I'm getting like flashbacks from sitting in front of like CNN watching like the election results come in on that like tablet map that they always have, and thinking like, I'm just looking at a bunch of colors on a map when I could be looking at something like this that's actually giving you a better idea of like why numbers are so skewed the way they are. Because I mean, they always talk about, okay, yeah, you're going to see a bunch of red counties, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, you're going to have a city like Philadelphia having 500,000 votes. So like, how can we visualize that in a way that, you know, someone who, you know, maybe doesn't feel as like they don't understand it as much, just looking at a couple colors, like something like this would probably provide them with that like better understanding of like where those votes are coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. It's been surprising to me, maybe less on the election stuff, but a lot on COVID, where it's actually been really hard for me to find just like a graph that or like some pretty basic information. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like there's not many people talking about things on a per capita basis or on a regional basis or on a more localized basis. We just hear sort of the anecdotal stories or just one number taken out of context. And so anyways, that's part of what we've been working on. So with that, I can jump into some other flows here, but this was fun to get 20 people into a flow together. For all of these, you know, you can host them on your own. So if you just go to a.flow.gl, you can, on any of the featured flows, once you have a login, just click on the Meet button. Or on many of the flows, when you're actually in them, there's a little invite button on the lower left-hand corner. And when you click that invite button, it actually creates a live meeting right in that instance. And then you can share that link with anyone to have a live meeting. So for that case, like right now, if I click invite, then you guys can all join this flow as well. I just started. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. You know, we sort of have twofold or two different streams that we are currently going down. So one is that we're working with the United Nations, the World Bank, Honeywell, Deloitte Consulting, and a few other enterprise customers, which has really been more of our focus for the last couple of years, which is how do enterprises more effectively communicate with their end customer or other clients to sell work, to deliver on projects, to communicate to other world leaders, et cetera. And that's really been our sort of primary use. But especially with TikTok and a lot of interest in sort of the platform at large, we have our self-service platform, which you sort of briefly saw, and I'll actually jump into next. That allows anyone to build these themselves. So whether it be for your school project or for a board meeting, right? You can build a flow similar to how you build a PowerPoint or a Tableau Visio, and it's a no-code platform. So actually, let me just go ahead and do that because I think it will help codify a little bit of what this platform really does and how it works. So let me just quickly, okay. So this is the editor. What I'm going to do first is add some data. So you can upload your own CSV file, or we often build data integrations to companies. If you sign up for the editor, you'll get access to just use these two data sets, which is global life expectancy and then 3,000 cities. So some pretty basic data. If you have other ones that are of interest, do let me know. But what I'm going to do first is create a swarm, which is the main data visualization elements of a of Flow. And so right away, you're seeing every dot here is a row of the data set. So let me just show you what this data is. So it's the countries, the income of that country in that year, the population, the life expectancy, the region, and a few other attributes. So kind of basic, right? So nothing too complex here, but what's interesting is, and this is actually inspired a little bit from a Hans Rosling video that we saw, is that, as I add another step here, what we can start to do is order this. So I'm going to create a perspective and change this from random to be a scatter plot. On the x-axis, I'm going to put the year. On the vertical axis, I'm going to put life expectancy. And on the depth axis, I'm going to put the different countries. And so we're starting to see this take a little bit of shape. Make this a little smaller. Yeah, let's set this to 0. So this is life expectancy of, I think, around 60 different countries throughout the world over the last 200 years. And so what we're starting to see with this shape is, in some ways, humanity's greatest success, that over the last 100 years especially, that we live longer, our children are likely to survive. And that also, though, within this are some of humanity's greatest failures. So let me change a few things here so we can scale the size of these dots, based on the population size. We can add in a color scheme based on the continent or some other attribute here. Let me go ahead and add another step, and I'll create connections, which there's far more complex things you can do with these, but on a very basic level, it's a way to connect dots together. So here's sort of these lines in space. Set the camera position for that step. Let me add one last step. And on this step, what I'm going to do is create a new perspective to actually filter this data for the last pandemic that we experienced. So let me look at the years between 1915 and 1921. And so here we can see this precipitous decline across every country actually in the globe on that year. And that was the Spanish flu. And yeah, very big impact. And so here what we've done is we built a flow with 4 steps, right? So it starts with this random ordering of dots, and then transitions into this view, sort of life expectancy for a bunch of countries, and then moves to these lines, and then we actually filter the data and look at it from a different point of view. And so from here, I can click Save, Publish, and Share. And just like before, this is now live on the web. So it's instantly available. You can open this on your phone. This is not the multi-user link, but just a flat screen one that you can go through asynchronously. And yeah, step through the content. You actually can update this. This is overlay text, and it'll make more sense when you see it. So yeah, soup to nuts here in just a couple of minutes. That we can build a flow from scratch, post it, have it be live on the web. Is no small feat, because this is, this works not just on flat screens and phones, but also in phones in AR mode, as well as head-mounted AR headsets. So the Magic Leap device, which is a head-mounted AR headset, or if you have an Oculus VR headset, that it also works in virtual reality. So it hits every platform just by going through the browser. It is powered by WebXR. So I will pause there for where we're at, and sort of open it to questions, or if there's other things I can sort of elaborate a bit more on.
There's actually one really interesting question in chat. Kent, if you're willing to unmute, feel free to just ask it aloud.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for that presentation. It's just so engaging. And I just wanted to kind of preface who I am. So I'm a bioengineer with a CS minor. I'm trying to get into consulting and more data analytics. And I know from my understanding that the standard in consulting, at least, was Excel, and now it's moving towards Alteryx and Tableau for data storytelling. And I could definitely see how will become the new standard after that. And I was wondering if that was one of your goals, considering your consulting background.
Yeah, absolutely. It's partially why I did this, is I spent too much time copying and pasting out of Tableau into PowerPoint, and then adding a bunch of circles and annotations, and just repeating that over and over and over. And it felt like there had to be a better way to have more engaging conversations around data. And so 100% that this is sort of where I think we need to go. And what I think is a little different between Tableau and what we're doing at Flow is that Tableau in many regards is more for dashboards and for, somewhat more analysis. Like we don't know what the insight is, but we're just going to explore it together and figure it out. Whereas Flow, I think, is a little bit more directed. And so within consulting, I'd say it's starting more in the client's engagement or the sales process rather than on the root analysis layer, if that makes sense. So that's where we're sort of finding some of those footholds. But consulting is also very slow, we'll say. It's funny because they advise on being the newest and the most forward thinking, but they themselves are actually quite conservative and don't like changing too much. So it's definitely an interesting area to sell back into, I will say, having worked in it for my whole career pretty much.
Thank you. Yeah,
but it's a very interesting combination, I will say. The consulting traditionally is very top down, so it's led by strategy, and then hypothesis driven. You find data that supports those hypotheses. Whereas data analytics is very bottoms up, that the data will reveal to you what's going on and what are the driving factors. And oftentimes those conflict with one another. And that is, I think, one of the core fundamental challenges behind data analytics and consulting sort of being combined together. And if you can figure that out and you can convey it effectively, you are well on your way. And it's that idea of wearing both hats, both to be able to explain it to someone and be able to understand the calculation and how this all happens is a very, very strong skill set to have today.
Can you talk a little bit about the adoption rate of like your of Flow software? Looking at like this walkthrough, it's obviously super cool, and like I obviously understand how it works and how I would set up my own flow, but I'm not sure if I would understand it without you having just walked me through how Flow works. So can you talk a little about how you're how Flow as a team, or you specifically, are working on like the adoption rates of the platform?
Yeah. So right now we're only letting a select few people in to really put the tool itself more through the paces. Because it is we're a small team, and there's still bugs that exist. And before we just throw it over the fence, we sort of want people to have a good first experience, and we want to ease through some of those pain points. That being said, we have spent a little bit of time on building this like tutorial that goes step by step for actually building one yourself, so that we have a tutorial here so you can click through to actually build your first flow. We also have this tutorial section here, which links to some videos, as well as some other sort of step-by-step videos. And then we've actually recently started hosting like a weekly training for an hour. And so actually it's tomorrow. So if anyone from today has a strong interest and feels like this really resonates with them and they'd like to get involved, I'd be happy to add you to tomorrow's training, where we're using that as a mechanism to, one, get feedback, but also to train up new people that can then train others, etc. So that's where we're at. So I won't say that our help videos are like the best thing in the world or always up to date, but we're constantly trying to change, adapt, and make the tool more usable.
I have two questions.
Sure.
First, I would like to know how you get your background on Zoom to like fade into you being the center of the screen and then not be the center of the screen.
Okay.
Like, I see so many professors struggling to use Zoom, and you're using it so effortlessly.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's so I'm not using Zoom. I'm using OBS for majority of this. I don't know if that makes sense. So OBS is a broadcast like studio. It's actually more so used by gamers, I'd say. But I'm using that to control all of the transitions and all of that. If that makes sense. So what I sort of indicated, one of the things we're experimenting with is this idea of presenting a flow while in a Zoom meeting. That's actually one of the things we're experimenting with, is that idea of, I'm going to show you real quick, that using OBS, but we'll ultimately put it into our tool itself. This idea that you can share both your screen and the flow itself, but also be able to see the presenter is something I think there's a lot of value in, just for just for Zoom meetings in and of themselves. So I'm pretty bullish on this idea. It's just still some things to test and tweak, but yeah, thank you for that observation, and that is the
yeah. I do have one more question. So on the app that you had us download, I see that the top sites are Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, Wikipedia, and I was just wondering how you utilize the other apps to like work with the flow, or like what that means by top sites.
Oh, sure. So the app is not ours. That's just it's a workaround until Apple updates Safari, basically, where it's a WebXR spec that is native in Chrome on Android devices, but on iOS devices they don't have it, and so Firefox released their own browser, and so those top link suggestions are just link suggestions for a browser, which is why they're sort of just generic sites. But one thing you didn't quite say it, but I'm gonna it's done. I can show it. Is that flows can actually be embedded on a site as well. So give me 1 second, I'll bring this up. So as an example of that, so on the UNDP websites, you can actually click into one of these sub pages and have this up. And so what you'll see is that within a website itself, you can actually embed a flow. And so this was the flow. This was part of the General Assembly this last year, which was really exciting for us. And so this is a flow that is just embedded, right? It's its own presentation. It exists in a 3D environment, but it's still within a typical web page. And so this is just one additional thing in terms of what you can do when you build a flow. It's that you can present to it during a meeting like we are right here. You can record a video and present those videos, and that's actually what has driven a lot of interest on TikTok and some of these other platforms, or host a live meeting. And so I say all this hopefully not to confuse you that there's too many things you can do, but the idea that you can build it once, but then present it synchronously as well as consume it asynchronously, I think is a really powerful combination that we're still all sort of grappling with. So does that address your question? I'm not sure if I fully got it.
Yes, thank you.
Cool. I see. If you'll put OBS project in there. Very good.
I'll jump in again if no one else has a question for now. Yeah, so I was wondering where you guys are in terms of funding and next steps forward and your current clients, or if you could share that stuff. I'm just really curious.
Sure. So it's without a doubt, a startup is very much a roller coaster. There's really high highs and there's really low lows. We are currently somewhat bootstrapped, so we've raised angel funding to date, and we've mostly been funded from our customers and more project-based work. However, we are right now we're trying to raise our seed rounds, whether VCs or through an angel round, to actually price the round itself and start to grow the team. So that is currently in progress, and so that's where we are funding wise. On the customer side, some of our notable customers to date. So we've worked with Cisco, we've worked with BlackRock, we've worked with Deloitte, who I mentioned, the World Bank, United Nations, Honeywell, One Identity, and Mergeflow. Might be missing a few others, but a lot of those were sort of more project-based work, if that makes sense. So the company was founded 4 years ago. I really came in to help productize it and try to launch the SaaS product, and that's what we're trying to go through now. But until then, we've mostly been, trying to build more project-based work and more VR in the beginning, but now we're transitioning more towards flat screens and mobile phones and a little bit more in AR, I'd say. So hopefully that helps illustrate a little bit about where we are in terms of our process.
Yeah, it does actually. It's funny because I've actually tried starting 2 startups at Northeastern already as well, and I've gone through the angel rounds as well. So I kind of know what you guys have been through, but obviously you're much further along, and you almost make me want to invest.
Good. I'm glad. It's it's funny. Everyone thinks of startup. It's like you work for 8 years to then become an overnight success. It's sort of like you got to go through a lot of a lot before suddenly something just clicks and takes off. And yeah, it's sticking with it every day. And even just a lot of the virality on TikTok is not something we really planned. It was not in our business plan at all. And it just sort of became emergent. It just emerged as we created more videos, and and just became another platform that I was posting on. So yeah, that's been an interesting sort of avenue. But I appreciate that you've gone through the entrepreneurial experience. You will learn a lot.
I was curious about the capabilities, like meaning at what stage do you put in the data into Flow? Like, do you clean it and process it and then you do all your calculations in Flow itself, or do you input a data set that already has been cleaned and processed and you have all the data you need and then you make the visualization with Flow?
Yeah, so it's the latter. So we've tried to narrow our focus to say what are the core competencies of the company, and the core competencies are the visualization piece and the collaboration piece, but not on the data cleansing and reformatting and other attributes there. There's a certain amount that you can do within the tool, and we're adding to that. We're thinking about adding aggregation layers and things like that. But for right now, where the tool's at, we do that in another tool, whether it be as simple as just in Excel or in R or in another software platform.
I was wondering if you've applied this data visualization to anything involving genetics, like using genetic data and then actually showing it visually in like a genetic form, which would make maybe analysis of like some of the really large genetic data pools more interesting or more engaging, if any of your customers have done that sort of thing yet.
So we actually just applied for a grant as part of the NIH, which is at the combination of data visualization and cancer. And their challenge and what we responded to is wanting to visualize data across multiple layers or multiple dimensions seamlessly in AR, VR, as well as on flat screens. And so it's this challenge of looking at both, it actually is 6 layers. So it's the actual population, so the population health, the individual, the actual tissue, the cells, and the cells, the subcellular details, and then the genetic code that is all there. And so if you think about all those different layers, there's obviously much different scales. But the idea being that if you can sort of shift between all of those scales, that you can start to glean insights and start to combine research activity in a way that can progress the field forward. And so we actually responded directly to that. We mocked up a small prototype with another company called QI Tissue, which specializes in microscopy and stains for cancer. And they have a lot of deep research in this, and we're really just adding on the AR, VR capabilities. But so that's a very ripe area. And something that we're still learning more about, but for computational biologists, for biologists, yeah, it seems like visualization, especially 3D visualization, is actually sort of par for the course. On the genomic side, I haven't seen as much innovation on the visualization side. And me personally, I haven't tried to tackle that either. So I think there's huge room for opportunity, but it's also, to me, it's like you need to know a little bit about what the end objective is in terms of what a researcher really does, in order to drive how the visualization should work. So that's my 2 cents on that. But yeah, it's definitely a huge opportunity area.
Wait, so when you said population, you mean like actual separate individuals? So you could scale up to the level of different individuals and then scale down to the level of the makeup of them?
Like they're just thinking more of like regional disease and stuff like that. It's more like epidemiology, I guess.
Okay, yeah. That's cool though. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I can actually find the NIH contract. Yeah, I'll paste this in the chat window. It's an interesting little read, I'd say. Cool. Yeah. So what else can I address, or if there's anything else you guys want to see here?
For me, I just thought it was interesting hearing about, applications for this in consulting. I've been I don't know if you're familiar with Northeastern. We have like co-op programs where we kind of have built-in 6-month internships into our degree.
Nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but at least for me, it's been like pretty opening and like great experience for kind of just figuring out what you want to do with your career.
Yeah.
But I've been spent like the last 10 months kind of interning with a consulting firm. And like one of our biggest challenges has definitely been figuring out how to keep large audiences engaged during presentations. I mean, it's hard enough as it is. And I've been fortunate enough to like kind of get a grips for it, just learning by doing. I think before COVID in February, I got to give like one of my first in-person readouts. In San Francisco with a big tech client, and it was awesome. Like people are engaged, people want to be there, but then when we had that transition to Zoom, it just like everything went kind of downhill. It was so difficult for us to kind of read a room and see what people felt and what were people's like impressions, and even getting people to like ask questions. Like normally people are so engaged that they're hypercritical of like everything we put up, but for Zoom it just turned into like dead silence, like as soon as you would finish something. And so like just being able to kind of like, and I'm not saying that every presentation we did like had data in it, but like this type of platform, like this ability to kind of bring people into like your own kind of presentation world, that it doesn't really feel like it's Zoom. It doesn't feel like you're virtually meeting people. Like it feels like you're actually there. I don't know, just like I was so just like kind of just engaged by everything. Like it just seems like such a useful tool. Like the question just kind of becomes, are people have the skills necessary to kind of like run with it? Because I know for me, like building the ability to do data analytics and like present in a way that people can easily interpret is like such a valuable skill set. Like it's really something I'm driving myself to pick up before I kind of go into the workforce.
Yeah. And I'll be fully honest, I personally feel like people like you are going to be the ones that drive it into consulting. It's not as much top down, right? It's really like, if you look at Slack, like the reason Slack was successful was because they changed the platform to be almost more of a consumer play rather than a B2B play. And essentially just engineers sort of adopted it and started using it as the platform of choice.
It pushed everybody else out just because they went in where people actually needed the tools and like, met the unmet needs of everyone who's actually using it daily. And then all of a sudden, what's the value of using like email internally anymore? Like I can just message you over Slack and we cut out all this kind of like formalized kind of BS, for lack of a better word, within your own company. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it's going to be that same sort of cultural shift that you, being an analyst at a consulting firm, you're going to have the power to really test it out and bring it to people, because ultimately it's going to differentiate yourself from everyone else presenting, and that's essentially how this becomes more the norm, rather than sort of the top-down approach, which, if Slack were to have gone to every executive and convince them that this communication platform is going to be better and they have to get a license for their whole company, it would have gone nowhere quick. And I think in a similar sense, even though we have some really awesome clients and customers, it's going to be the younger generation I always actually joke that a new consultant is like a stem cell. You can change into anything you want. It's just a matter of where you direct the energy. And in that sense, like, learning this tool is not difficult, and being able to be fluent to data and communicating is such a critical skill. So with that said, if you want to join tomorrow for training, I'd be more than happy to just get you rocking and rolling in the editor. So yeah.
I'm definitely kind of thinking about, what you said like at the beginning was about, you would imagine that because consulting firms are marketing themselves as like the experts and like on the cutting edge of everything, like you'd expect like all these things to just be like naturally a part of everything they do. But like the truth is, as you say, like it's very kind of old fashioned. Like people get comfortable in the way they do things, as every business kind of ends up experiencing. But even more so with like, sometimes I'm kind of just like left kind of speechless by just how old fashioned everything is, and how slow it can be at times when you're like simply switching from like PowerPoint to Google Slides to meet some client's demand is like a challenge for some people. Like
right.
It becomes just, like everything's like a little bit over the top, and just trying to integrate this stuff in, I think, is like the next step needed to kind of push like what might be a unknown boutique firm to kind of like more prominence with bigger clients. So
yeah, it just takes one, there's always technology laggards, and especially in consulting, which is a lot about risk mitigation. It's just something that par for the course. But I think it's just with any technology, it's crazy until suddenly it's not crazy.
Exactly.
And you just got to accept that.
And I'm thinking of like, some audiences this might not be perfect for. I know like obviously some clients are going to be working where people just like, this just isn't in their range of understanding. But like, if I'm talking to a big tech client, like these people are going to eat it up, because they're not only going to like kind of understand what you're presenting, but also it's going to be engaging on like twofold. Like they're going to see it as something that they can potentially use moving forward for their own work as well. And then it's more like they can read it super easily. They don't feel like falling asleep by just looking at like boring graphs. Like I'm actually taking them through a story. So,
yeah.
It's super cool. Like this has just been awesome.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm glad I resonate with you. And let's chat more. And, just on that one thought stream, one thing we've heard from the financial services industry is that they're currently trying to figure out how to better engage with a younger demographic, that's going to be inheriting a lot of money from an older generation. And that they're probably not going to go into traditional wealth management, that they're competing with like Robinhood, basically. It's like, this is sort of the Robinhood generation, people feeling empowered to do it themselves, as well as sort of a clean user interface and using technology. And here you have these sort of archaic, or not archaic, but very traditional, like, wealth managers, which talk to you and present to PowerPoints, and that actually there's an appetite essentially to have more engaging conversations around your portfolio and how your portfolio is doing, and allocating budget, as well as allocating your the portfolio appropriately based on your risk and all sorts of different factors. And so that's actually been sort of an emerging area for us as well, is in sort of that wealth management side of things.
Kind of wanted to piggyback off of the whole big tech thing. So I'm not really sure if you mentioned like your role within Flow, but do you know how defensible they would be? Like if Google or someone else could kind of make this and kind of take all your clients from you?
Sure. So so I'm a head of business. You sort of wear a lot of hats in a startup, and I certainly delve to many different sides of things, but I try to stay more on the business side. And so on the defensible side, so we do have a patent. I won't go into too much details on the patent itself or the defensibility of the patent. But what we're working on is non-trivial in terms of the actual underlying technologies either. So this is all built on the web. And so the ability to, one, be on the web, two, work across all devices, including AR headsets, VR headsets, mobile phones, laptop screens, is no small effort. So there's 10 man years of work that's gone into it, and to make sure it works across all those devices and is optimized for each device. So there's a lot of things there that I'm just honestly not that concerned about someone trying to trying to do themselves. In addition, I think we've carved out an interesting niche, which is really focusing on the data storytelling aspect, as opposed to, we're not trying to be a collaboration app. So there's lots of collaboration apps out there that are like spatial and Meet in VR, basically like presence apps. And really, we see the future as us sort of being the content, the thing you plug into a lot of these providers. So that's sort of my take on competition and established players. I think there's I think it was in Andreessen Horowitz or some quote where it's essentially all startups exist in this realm or a time window between the innovation and adoption of that innovation versus the time it takes for a giant company to realize it and try to build something themselves. And so if you are established enough, either in terms of customer base or protectable IP, that then you have a acquisition opportunity, or that you have a defensible market position. So I don't think we're any different than most industries for that. And it's a SaaS product and scalable. And ideally we start to see some network effects being a communication platform.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So I will also, this is my email. It's michael@flow.gl. It's for anyone that'd like to get an invite for tomorrow's training and take a next step to learn the platform and get early access.
I'm going to drop a bunch of really cool links that were here. Included there is Michael's LinkedIn, Michael's TikTok, Flow's, the web app that you saw, and then at the very end is Michael's email as well. If we have, I know we're reaching kind of towards the 1 hour, so just in case there's no last minute questions, Michael, if you had any closing words, or we can wrap it up.
No, but I hope I've convinced you that data isn't just for analysts and to stay private, but is really the way we change the world in many ways. That there's a lot of problems in the world, and we're all experiencing that right now. And I think using data as sort of a driver in conversations is really going to be how we change the world moving forward. And as much as we can get you involved in that, I hope that we're starting a movement here towards more data literacy and using data more and more in our conversations. And in a weird way, I feel like COVID has sort of almost created this cultural shift towards data visualization, where everyone saw that graph of the flatten the curve, and it became sort of a little bit of a mantra. And I think that this is a very prime time to really use data to drive decision making. And it's been a pleasure to connect with you all, and don't hesitate to reach out. I will try to respond as quickly as I can to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for your time, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. All right. Have a good rest of your day.